time to shift gears. This is the Man Shift Guide.
Welcome back to another episode of the Man Shift Guide. And today is maybe a little bit of a heavier one. I feel passionate about this topic because it's not one that is very common amongst or openly spoken about amongst the male population, if you will. And I'm grateful that Jason has taken the charge and is willing to open up about his story. And without giving away any of the spoilers, because it is not my story to tell, it is Jason's story to tell. We'll just dive right into it and go. You can go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Jason Accashian. I live in North Carolina. Just recently moved from Charlotte about 8 months ago to the beach, which has been a great, mental and emotional kind of transition. I've got three kids. All of them are grown. It's just my baby girl just turned 21, and my baby boy just graduated college. So, life is coming at me full steam right now.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Um, so we had a little bit of a conversation earlier, and so you had to go through some difficult things in your life. You talk about nearly dying in an accident at work, and you've talked about having a pretty nasty separation in a divorce that was probably not something that you've ever expected to have to deal with yourself. And so I
Correct.
kind of I kind of want to start there with like the divorce and what happened and how it happened, with giving as much details as you're willing to give, because there's two sides to every story, so we don't want to
Right.
you know throw anybody under the bus here.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so let's kind of start from there. So you've been divorced for how long now? How long has that been?
Um, about 16 years.
Okay, so there's been a
Yeah,
little bit of separation from what happened to where we are now. So
absolutely.
what led up to this divorce happening?
So, it started off like any other relationship, flowers and unicorns. And, we had a couple of kids, and it kind of quickly changed. A few years in, there started being some verbal abuse, which slowly turned into physical abuse. I've always likened it to. They always say that if you put a frog in boiling water, he'll immediately jump out. But if you put a frog in cold water and increasingly up that temperature to boil, he'll just sit there because he gets used to the water and he'll boil himself to death. So that's kind of how the relationship was. I woke up one morning and realized, this is not a healthy relationship. I was being berated in front of my children. Any type of fatherly, role that I wanted to have was being undercut. Started being slapped, hit, pushed, hit with items, etc. Um, and during the end of that relationship, when the abuse was getting pretty bad and was on a semi multi-time a week basis, I started getting sick, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. So over about a 2-year span, I was this medical mystery, to find out that I was getting carbon monoxide poisoning from my work. I developed some lesions on my brain. I was having difficulty walking, talking. I would stutter. So of course, when I would stutter, I would get beat for stuttering. Um, if you've ever dealt with anybody with carbon monoxide poisoning, it just makes you lethargic, sleepy. And so I would get beat for taking a nap in the middle of the day. And once we found out that it was carbon monoxide poisoning, I had to start taking physical therapy. I was taking physical therapy, speech therapy, and cognitive therapy. So it was 3 hours of therapy, 3 days a week. And one weekend, everything hit the fan at the house. I had my kids, my two youngest were in my lap. We were watching cartoons. She came back from shopping and wanted to know who folded the towels wrong. And I said it was me. Next thing I know, I get punched in the face. When I kind of came to, my youngest boy was pushing her off of me. And the next day at physical therapy, they asked me how my weekend was. And I just lost it, started crying. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to go home. I was stuck in this suicidal mindset that I was constantly battling. Would my kids be better off if I just killed myself versus, my kids were the only reason that I was still here. So there was this battle that I was just getting really exhausted fighting. And so, of course, when I said, what had happened over the weekend, they immediately stopped my my physical therapy, and they took me to this room, and I had to file charges. The social services came out. They corroborated everything. My kids, said what had happened and ordered her to get anger management classes. About 2 weeks later, she left. But the kids left, never had to do any anger management classes, got full custody of the kids, kept them from me for about 6 months while I was paying, monies. Wasn't even getting to see my kids. And had to pretty much rebuild my life, not just my monetary life, but my physical life. At the time, I was pushing 300 pounds. Um, I basically just had to rebuild mentally, physically, emotionally, financially. And fast forward 16 years, and I've finally just started to speak out. About 2 years ago, I signed up to take this class to learn how to be a speaker for domestic violence. And as a man, I have had a more of an impact than I had anticipated. I was just going in there, just trying to unpack some of the garbage that I was still kind of holding on to. And the last couple of years have been a blessing, being able to talk to people and just see how I can help.
First off, I'm gonna say, it's very, very awesome that you were able to pull through from that because, like, you talk about the physical abuse, and then, on top of having to go through physical therapy, and then I would say at that time, like, you kind of already covered it. Like, you didn't really know like your value, and like I'm sure your emotional was not very good, and it's just man, like that just to kind of like sit and think about like all of that not so great feelings that you would have at that time, and especially having, your kids then taken away from you. And it just kind of makes you wonder, like, how does somebody pull through that? Like when you were in that spot when it was just like it was just you and you're trying to rebuild your life, which is a terribly hard thing to do for anybody. It doesn't matter like what the situation is. If you're like starting over, regardless of how it happened, like that's very, very difficult thing to do. So like was there other people that you had to help you? Or there like services you were able to find at the time? Or was this really just kind of you on your own, just like I need to do something?
No, so during the course of the relationship, as with any unhealthy relationship, there is a divide and conquer. So I had been kind of withdrawn from my family, withdrawn from the majority of my friends. It's kind of my kids. I'd go to work, I'd come home, and I'd be at home with my kids were my life. Everybody else had either been pushed away or just didn't feel comfortable coming around because of the toxicity of the relationship. So it was basically me. And I woke up one day and everybody was gone. And I never understood, and I would hear people say that the silence is deafening. And I really had no idea what that was, but I had spent every day with my children up until, she took them and left. And it was a reality check. I'm sitting there and I've still got the cartoons on that I had watched every night. But now it's just me in the house. And I knew then that if I did not do something to change this, I was not going to make it. I started working out. I started just getting more into recognizing and my own uh, emotions, trying to get in touch more with fact versus fiction. Because when you are in the darkness, as I call it, nothing really makes sense. The only way out is typically the wrong way. I tried to kill myself 3 different times. And fortunately, it never fully panned out. I remember standing in a chair and had a belt tied around my neck, and I thought to myself, well, what if my kid finds me? It's not even like I was ready to go, but what if my kid finds me? Like, well, what does that do to a kid? You walk in and you see your dad. Um, you know, my dad left when I was one. I was raised by my mom and my grandparents. So I always had this desire to just be a good dad. I wanted to be a present father. I wanted to be supportive and loving to my kids, basically the opposite of what I got as a young child. So to think about leaving them and going out that way, it just it was more of like almost like how dare you subject them to that trauma that they're going to carry with them. Like I've been carrying dad trauma for a while, and I'm like, I don't want to put my kids through that. So I joke with my oldest boy, because when I found out that I was going to have a kid, I'm not sure I was really ready for it, nor was the relationship ready for it. Um, but I told him when I started doing speaking out, I told him, I said, is it going to offend you if I say that the child that I didn't want is the child that saved my life? And he said, absolutely not. Like, we have a fantastic relationship. He understands what that means. At the time, I didn't want a kid. But then you fast forward 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and that kid saved me. And so when you look at things that way, when you step back from the darkness and all the chaos that might be going around, and you can separate fact from fiction, that's really whenever you find your your kind of floor. You can't fall past that because that's your fact fiction line. And I think once I was able to determine that and realize that all the things I had been told that I was, it didn't define me. It was up to me to figure out who I was. It was up to me to define how I was going to be viewed, and looked at moving forward. And I decided that the victim mentality was not getting me anywhere, and I had to pick myself up and kind of get stronger in all aspects.
Find that process of getting stronger, was that kind of like a brick by brick for you, or was that like an all at once? Because I know sometimes when we want such deep change, we try to do all at the time, right? And then we can't do everything all at once, and then we kind of like either peter out, or we kind of get more into depression because nothing you're trying to do is working because you're doing everything. So how was that actual change looked like for you? Like what was first, what was second?
Well, it was a one step forward, two step back. So after she left with the kids, and half the property, I went out, got some things to put the house back together. Then a couple months later, she would come back, to because she forgot some things and she would grab more stuff. And so there were two or three times where I had put the house back together only to have it ransacked. It was like she just did not want me to move on to start rebuilding. So every time I would start the rebuilding, she would kind of come in and kick some things down. Dealing with social services, and the way that I was treated in the court system was just an absolute nightmare. I was paying child support on a fictional child because they told her there was an additional child in the home who wasn't even mine, but he didn't exist to begin with. Um, but they wouldn't even let me present evidence to um, go against what she was saying. So it seemed like every time I would kind of move forward, I was getting kicked back down. Those 6 months when I didn't have my kids, I was working three jobs, just trying to survive and keep a house over, their head. The first winter that I had them, I couldn't even afford to get the heat turned on. So when they would come to visit, we had a space heater in the living room. We would all just kind of camp in the living room and stay warm. And it was rough. But when I started kind of just realizing that these were just kind of hurdles, and I had to just continue to focus on myself. I know it sounds selfish, but in that time, I wasn't doing anybody any good, being a shell of who I wanted to be. So I started running, and it I laugh when I think about how the running story finally kind of unfolded. There was this huge loop around this area. It was about a 4.5 mile loop. And my goal was to run that loop, to run it without stopping. And so it took me several months of every day going out, jogging a little, running a little. And finally, after a couple of months, I was finally able to run this loop. And I remember running it, and I'm coming down the home stretch. I could see my house in the distance, and I'm filled with this sense of accomplishment. Like it's amazing how low you've been when just running 4 miles is like your life's accomplishment at that point in time. And as I get about 100 yards from the house, I'm starting to kind of smile, like, you did it, big guy, you did it, man. And the next thing I know, head on collision right in front of my house. I see this lady get like ejected from the car. And like this is so it went from being it kind of showed me that here I was doing this for me, but then in the grand scheme of things, I don't even remember, anything about the last 100 yards of that accomplishment, because now life threw this insane like situation in my face. And so I take off my shirt, it's all sweaty, I'm holding it over this is just and it just goes to show you that it doesn't matter, what you're trying to accomplish. You just got to keep going. Just every day, you have to keep going. And that's pretty much, how I've been able to make it to where I'm at now. I've always wanted to live at the beach. And, for 35 plus years, I lived in the same hometown, or same town that I was living in with my kids. And you do get conditioned. You get conditioned to just thinking that where you're at is the only place you're ever going to be. And it takes it takes a lot of just self-confidence to just keep getting up every day and just keep trying. That's all I can say. You just got to get up every day and keep trying. That mentality where I wanted to quit so many times. Um, to think about that then and to think about where I'm at now, it's been a miracle and a blessing.
Excuse me. So let's start about you're now doing like these public speaking things, which you said started about 2 years ago.
Correct.
How did that happen? How did you get to space to do that? Like,
So I had been contemplating it for several years. I had actually been contacted by the gentleman over the county domestic violence center um, to say, hey, we don't have a lot of men that speak on this. Would you be interested? And at the time, I was still kind of in the midst of the abuse and just kind of trying to heal myself. I wasn't ready. So I would probably say about 6 years later, it just kind of hit me one day. I was like, you know what? I've got a story to tell. I don't look like a lot of the people that you see talk about domestic violence. So I thought, can I make a difference? And so I signed up for the class. And it was 4 days. It was filled with a lot of laughter and a lot of tears. I was one of only two men in there, and the other gentleman was there because he was actually a victim of sexual abuse. So he wasn't even there to talk about domestic violence. And so the next year, year and a half, I did a multitude of podcasts and live speaking events, and it's been it's been an emotional journey. You have people come up to you and say that, just hearing my story as a man has really helped them understand not only their journey and their story, but also um, some of these ladies brought their husbands with them, and so for the husbands to hear an abuse story from a man, it really kind of made them double back on their actions. And there's been several ladies that have come up to me after the fact and said that it has made an impact on their relationship. And several men that have come up to me after the fact and said, thank you for sharing. And now I'm just trying to bring awareness to men's mental health, men's emotional health. We've got a lot of men walking around these days, especially young men, walking around just angry all the time. And it's because, I think about when I was angry, when I was angry at the relationship that I did not have with my own father, or I was mad at the relationship that I had with my abuser. You walk around angry, and a lot of times you don't even really know why. It's just that daily compounding of frustration and you don't feel heard. So I just try to speak on um, relationships and partners giving that man in your life that safe space to where when he's frustrated or hurting or sad or whatever it might be, give him that safe space to express those without making him feel weak in doing that. There's a quote. It says, some people view crying as a weakness, but man, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to edit that out because it slipped my mind. But there's just so many men nowadays that I see, that are trying to create this positive space for men, and I think that that's truly important.
let's see if I can find the quote here. Um, and I'm kind of thinking of like, are you aware of like places or like services that people can go to, especially for men? Because again, this is something that's not very talked about, but I have heard that there are like how they have like homes now that are kind of popping up for men for like domestic abuse and stuff like that. Like, are you aware of any of those things?
So, of course, 16 years ago, there was nothing. I had to go to the Women's Domestic Violence Center to file my report, which was kind of strange. I had to file my report and then go straight back home to my abuser. So there were no services for me at the time. over the last couple of years, I've tried to go around, especially back in my hometown, and speak with those agencies that let me down during that time. And sadly, at least in my hometown, there really has not been much of a change. There's not a lot of credibility given to men when they say that they're in abusive relationships. The last time I checked, a few months ago, there were only a handful of men's shelters across the country. They will put you up in a hotel, but it's usually for about 48 hours, and then you got to figure things out on your own. And the biggest issue there is by the time it gets to a point where you are actually filing a report, you've probably been isolated from 90% of the people in your life. So when you finally do stand up, you're standing up alone. And so whatever services are there, unfortunately, seem to be temporary. And then at that point in time, what do you do? So I think that's why a lot of people don't come forward, especially men, because you've got the stereotype, situation going on. You don't think people are going to believe you because you don't hear about men and abuse and being, men are always the abuser, not the person being abused. So, I have tried to speak out as much as I can, to just get some services out there that are at least added to these websites. But you have to scroll all the way to the bottom to find out, oh yeah, and by the way, we also have these men's services. We need to move some of that to the top of the page.
Sure. And we'll be sure to put those services and the link in our description here when we find those out. And I'm sure that you have some that you can send. And I- I'm grateful that you are willing to talk about this and that you're so open about this particular topic. Being that I'm sorry you had to go through that. Like
All
that's
right.
a
That's
terrible
all right.
thing, but you've turned it around. You kind of like you said, you kind of changed that victim mentality, and now you're kind of going out there and you're putting the word out there, which sometimes that has to be how it happens, right? It takes that one
Yeah.
person that has to struggle through something, but then is opening and talking about that. So grateful that you're doing that. And in the meantime, how can we best get a hold of you?
So I mean, I don't really do a lot of social media. I'm I post things very, very rarely, but if anybody ever wanted to reach out to me, my email address is lil this, lil that 4850 at gmail.com. That's LILTHISLILTHAT 4850 at gmail.com. Um, Always willing to have a conversation, always willing to help and direct anyone in any way that I can. Just it there was no one that seemed to understand, even when I spoke up during my um, physical therapy session. I think it caught some people truly off guard. So I think the biggest thing is documentation, somehow, some way, document, things that are going on. Um, and just CYA, make sure you cover yourself. As a man, I was not allowed to hit back, and she knew that. So, make sure that you don't do anything stupid, protect yourself. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be an image that you're going to have to portray. When things do hit the fan, and so you got to make sure that you protect yourself.
What? Absolutely. Well, again, Jason, I thank you for being here and sharing your story. And again, we'll put the email if you're so willing to, since you gave it to us. We'll put that in the description as well as any other resource that we can find to help those who are seeking help on both ends. Like, this is not just one way or other. I mean, there are services for everybody out there, and hopefully, if you are in need, that we're able to help you find those things. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So this has been another episode of the Man Shift Guide, and we will see you on the next one.